In 1975, a 729-foot steel Titan battled hurricane-force winds on the deadly Lake Superior. At 7:10 p.m., the captain radioed, "We are holding our own," only for the ship to vanish minutes later, taking all 29 crew members with it. Was it inclement weather, a fatal structural snap, or a phenomenon known as the Three Sisters? Today, we're discussing the tragic sinking of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. This is Red Web. Welcome back, Task Force, to another episode of Red Web, the podcast all about unsolved mysteries, true crime, and the unknown. I'm your resident mystery enthusiast, Trevor Collins, and joining me hearing this case for the very first time, Alfredo Diaz.
And we're talking about typical weather or structural integrity of the ship or whatnot, and then all of a sudden, hold on, what is this Three Sisters thing? Here we go. Ooh. It's never just the norm.
It's a cheeky little hint.
There's always a possibility of something real wild.
Yes. Now we'll get into what the Three Sisters are. For those of you who live around the Great Lakes or might know of Lake Superior, you'll know what the Three Sisters are. But for Fredo, I'm going to titillate you with what that is, and we'll talk about it at the end. But yes, this is a tragic incident that happened back in the 70s. This was a freighter. The SS Edmund Fitzgerald was enormous. We're going to give you the entire background on this record-setting vessel there on Lake Superior. We're going to talk about what happened that fateful evening. We're going to talk about the discovery of the wreck, kind of the investigation as to what might have happened that night. But ultimately, yeah, it remains technically unsolved as to what exactly happened, how it sank. We know all of the moving parts, and so there's a lot of confidence in each of the theories, but I think there is a reality that blends them all together. So at the end, we'll talk about those various theories and how they all overlap. It's kind of a more interesting and unique take on our normal theories. You know, normally it's like theory A and B and C. This one, they all kind of weave together, but Lake Superior is truly, I mean, any of the Great Lakes, they're enormous. If you're international and you're not super familiar with the Great Lakes, it is probably more apt to say that they are baby seas or baby oceans, because a lake feels like, yeah, my grandpap's got a lake outside his house, you know?
Right.
These things are monsters, and they can get terrifying. We've also talked about the Michigan Triangle, so to speak. There's been disappearances, shipwrecks galore all throughout Lake Michigan and the Great Lakes. And again, we'll talk about kind of the weather that centers on these sometimes, and maybe some of the origin behind that so-called Michigan Triangle. But before we dive in, Fredo, you know we have a lot happening these days. We got the Scary Stories podcast happening every other Thursday, but also on our Patreon page at redwebpod.com. This Wednesday, we have a poll. It's kind of a choose-your-own adventure with Red Web, whether it's a future episode of Movie Club, of this podcast, of Scary Stories, or if you, sometimes it's just putting things in contention with one another, whether it be a cryptid battle, choosing your favorite haunted location we've been to, or even voting for what the next bonus feature you guys are going to get. It's always a grab bag, so come hang out, choose what's going to happen on Wednesday. And Friday, I'm going to throw this one to Christian because we're covering Movie Club with the only movie that's on his Letterboxd.
The only movie that deserves to be on my Letterboxd. It's the greatest movie of all time. We're doing The Matrix.
The Matrix.
I mean, it's really, really good.
It's the only one on his Letterboxd, and it's rated a sultry
5 stars. Thank you very much.
5 stars, of course.
I was about to say, if it wasn't 5 stars, what's happening here?
I like the idea that you go to his Letterboxd, and it's just, not only is it there once, it's there about 15 dozen times because it's all the rewatches. And maybe one Saturday afternoon, he's having a bad day and he rates it 4 stars. But then Sunday he goes for the rewatch, double feature, and it goes back to 5, you know? And it's just, you just see how many times he watches it in a month.
For the longest time, I didn't know Letterboxd had the rewatch feature, so I never had that idea. Because right now my Letterboxd is just The Matrix, 5 stars, and I think my bio says The Matrix is the greatest movie ever made. And that's my whole profile.
Someone's looking at that going like, this guy really liked The Matrix. Have you seen, I saw every once in a while a reel will pop up and it's just like The Matrix premiere, and it's like it's just showing like all around the world people going to see The Matrix for the first time. And like, this is where people would line up and there'd be long lines outside the movie theater. So you're like, cool, I gotta get my good seat, whatnot. And they're just going down, the camera's going down the line, and the number of dudes, slick back hair, glasses, duster. I'm just like, yeah, these guys are ready to just, plug in. They're like, they are the Matrix, man.
That's awesome.
I bring a keyboard and a katana or whatever else. Yeah, dude, The Matrix is awesome. I'm so glad we're covering it. It makes sense because, Task Force, if you don't know, we recently covered Underworld, which is kind of The Matrix with werewolves and vampires. We also recently covered Sinners. So we're kind of in a vein right now. And Sinners, I should say, is free to everybody. So if you want to listen to what you're maybe missing in Movie Club and you're not a member of a task force over at redwebpod.com, come hang out. Come listen to Sinners. What's going on with it? How is Movie Club? Do you like it? I bet you will. We also drop a whole bunch of other sneak peeks, bonus posts, and things like that throughout the year, just whenever we're feeling like it. We gave a little sneak peek as to Red Web Radio 2. So if you were a Task Force member, you got to see what it was going to look like early. And real quick, today we have an audience survey in the description. It only takes just a few minutes and it's completely optional, so don't feel pressured, but it's a better way for us to get to know you guys. Whether you've listened for 5.5 years or you're brand new to Red Web, we want to get to know you guys. So if you feel like it, there is an audience survey, like I said, link in the description wherever you listen to us, and we would really appreciate it. Let's dive in to the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. This was submitted by Task Force member Connor Hastings, so thank you so much for submitting that. All right. So the SS Edmund Fitzgerald was a freighter that traveled the Great Lakes from the late 1950s until it sank in 1975. Now, of course, I like to start with a visual so that way you know what we're talking about, the theater of the mind, Fredo. So take a look at the first image. Task Force, it will be on screen on YouTube, Spotify, and our social media.
Oh, interesting shaped boat.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a freighter, so I'm assuming, okay, so the front is heavily stacked. There's like multiple decks. That's where they got the steering wheel, for lack of better words.
Yeah.
And then you have kind of like just a lot of empty space in the middle. Then it scoops back up into multiple decks. And I guess like the engine in the back, you see some smokestacks, whatnot. But I'm guessing that's where they put the cargo, was in the middle or something.
Yes, absolutely. That's where like all the cargo would be able to be accessed through hatches in the top. We'll talk about those. And I'm sure, though not confident on this particular iteration of a freighter, but traditionally, yes, you could also put cargo on top of the decks that can then stack. But yeah, we're talking about a big old classic freighter, and this thing is Enormatron. I'll give you an idea of its size here in just a minute. But the ship made its maiden voyage in 1958. It was carrying taconite from the mines in Minnesota to ironworks in different cities bordering the Great Lakes. So taconite, quick crash course history here, if you're not familiar with it, it's a low-grade type of iron ore that was once considered complete waste because the concentration of iron in this rock is anywhere between 15 to 20%, sometimes upwards of 30%, but nothing really like other locations across the US. The US then decided to focus on high-grade iron ore, kind of throwing this away. Though once that was majorly depleted, mid-century processing methods brought value back to taconite, which is then saving the Minnesota mines. You can then crush it down, process it, and then create iron pellets that then those are what's shipped. That's what is then kind of taken to steel mills in order to make steel.
Oh.
And then obviously the infrastructure of the country.
Yeah, it's interesting how like different materials will be considered like not that great or kind of like low tier. I think good examples are Brussels sprouts or like crawfish. They're like no one gives a damn about Brussels sprouts, and then I think it was like LA that took it and started making it, like fancying it up, putting a little this and that on it and spins. And now you have them in like really nice steak restaurants, and it's like, oh, I'll have Brussels sprouts. I'll have a serving for $20, and it's like before no one cared about it.
Brussels sprouts are excellent. Now there's got to be a business insider on this, and I feel like this information is coming to my brain from somewhere. I want to say it was late 80s, maybe the 90s, where, Brussels sprouts used to be extremely bitter. And so they were bred to completely change their flavor profile. And so now in a more modern time, they are actually palatable and they are cooked in oils, which soak up a lot of flavor, a lot of fats. And so with proper seasoning, they can taste incredible, but just a few decades ago, this was not something Mom grew up eating, you know what I mean?
No, not at all.
But yeah, I mean, taconite isn't too dissimilar in the sense that in the early days, they're like, what is this wasteful rock? Not enough iron. But then as time goes on, they figure out, oh, we've burned out all of the good mines. I guess we got to figure out how to use this. So when the ship made its debut, it was the largest ship to set sail on the Great Lakes. An estimated 15,000 people came just to see this ship break water and sail for the first time. So it's a pretty big deal.
People like them ships.
They like them ships. But also, like, I really can't, I don't know if you've been to the Great Lakes before, Fredo. I've stood on the dunes of Indiana looking north into Lake Michigan, and there are spots where, yeah, you can see land across the other side, like Chicago into Michigan, on a clear day. But there's a lot of angles where if you're looking out onto a Great Lake, you see the infinite horizon. I mean, these lakes are huge, and so you're gonna see ships that can carry massive amounts because the water can carry massive ships. So seeing a ship like this for a landlocked state for the most part is a rare opportunity. And so yeah, it's going to attract a lot of eyes because you're not near a major port in California or what have you. So you see this behemoth slide into the water. The ship was nicknamed the Queen of the Lakes. It was 729 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 39 feet tall.
Did they do the whole breaking champagne on it or something?
I don't know, to be honest.
Or is that for like cruises and stuff?
I don't know. It could be for cruises, could be for passenger vehicles. But every time I think of that, I think of one viral video where somebody tried to do that and the bottle just kept banging off the side.
Dude, the amount, I would just be like, done, it's okay.
Yeah. You know what? I don't want to ride this boat anymore. That seems like an omen.
It does, yeah. At what point I go, maybe I shouldn't be on it.
So this ship is oddly similar to the Titanic, from being the largest of its kind and pretty fast, all the way down to how it broke apart in its final hour in the frigid waters. So I do have an image of this ship in a 3D rendering next to the Titanic. So if you know the Titanic, we talked about it before on this show, you can kind of get an idea of just how massive this freighter is.
Whoa, that's a big boy. Oh, this is a beautiful representation. Dang.
Mm-hmm.
So they just want to carry a ton of stuff at one time.
Yep, that's the goal.
The Titanic was so big.
Oh, she big.
She was a massive boat.
Yeah. I mean, now if you see like the Spirit of the Sea or whatever that new cruise ship is, it absolutely dwarfs both of these things.
True.
But honestly, that ship is terrifying to behold. So either way, though, they're still massive.
The way that, like, man, cruises are just a thing, and they have everything on there. It's like almost like you'll have a whole theme park on the damn cruise itself.
Yeah. You could have like a little city inside. You could go see a live performance, a live show somewhere else. You could ride a roller coaster. You could swim in multiple pools. Yeah, man, I don't know. It's just a traveling estate at that point.
Yeah, it really is.
Now, although the ship was the largest on the water at the time, it was not oversized in the context of Lake Superior. Again, these lakes are huge, and to give you some context to that enormity, Lake Superior is 31,700 square miles, or just north of 82,000 square kilometers. It is the largest freshwater lake in the world by surface area. And if you want a better comparison, Fredo, this is about the size of South Carolina, or about the size of Ireland.
Okay, that's pretty big.
Mm-hmm. It's not the shape, obviously, but
right, yeah.
Surface area.
You're trying to compare sizes.
Mm-hmm. So now on November 9th, 1975, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald set sail from the port in Superior, Wisconsin around 2:30 p.m. She was captained by Master Captain Ernest M. McSorley, who I do have an image of because we're going to talk a lot about McSorley. I want a face for the name. Thanks to the Sun-Times News for this image. And the ship had a full cargo of taconite ore pellets, resulting in an astounding 26,116 long tons. Not normal tons, these are, I think, a British unit. One long ton is equivalent to 2,240 pounds, or just over 1,000 kilograms. So we're talking hefty.
Yeah.
Okay, in other words, this is 58.5 million pounds, or 26.5 million kilograms.
The scientists that go behind just having such a big brain to just figure out, like, All right, we're gonna have this giant boat, and this giant boat that's on water that's floating is gonna be able to hold this much. Like, dang, man, how do you come up with that stuff? How do you figure that stuff out? That's wild to me.
Buoyancy is wild. When I was a kid, I'm thinking Titanic's. I was obsessed with the Titanic. Titanic's made out of metal. Metal sink in bathtub.
Right.
How metal fly across ocean?
You're like, my Hot Wheels don't float.
My Hot Wheels don't float. My Power Rangers figures don't float.
Why Titanic don't sink?
Yeah, dude, the buff minds necessary to invent and develop such a massive behemoth capable of carrying such immense weight. I feel like they're so buff of their minds that they could probably pick up this ship one-handed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you know they got neck issues because their brains.
They got
so
neck
big.
issues. Right, brain so big, neck issues. Oh, man.
This episode of Red Web is sponsored by BetterHelp. Financial stress affects far more than bank accounts. It can take a serious toll on mental health and relationships. Money worries often bring anxiety, sleep disruption, and even depression, and are one of the leading sources of conflict for couples. Therapy can help unpack your relationship with money, build healthier coping strategies, and make you feel less alone in the process. Therapy is so helpful for learning positive coping skills and how to set boundaries, ultimately empowering you to be the best version of yourself. BetterHelp therapists work according to a strict code of conduct and are fully licensed in the US. BetterHelp does the initial matching work for you so you can focus on your therapy goals. If you aren't happy with your match, switch to a different therapist at any time from their tailored recommendations. With over 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served over 6 million people globally. And it works. With an average rating of 4.9 out of 5 for a live session based on over 1.7 million client reviews. When life feels overwhelming, therapy can help. Sign up and get 10% off at betterhelp.com/redweb. That's betterhelp.com/redweb.
Yeah, 58.5 million pounds of iron ore pellets is pretty gnarly. So like I said, they set off from the port in Superior, Wisconsin, and they are destined for the steel mill near Detroit, Michigan. And so if you don't know, I'll show you at the end kind of the route that they were intending to take. But ultimately, going across Lake Superior, then heading into the southeast corner, where they would take rivers that connect the Great Lakes, and that's how they would make it to Detroit. Now, typically, this would be a 5-day journey, but on the second day, weather conditions worsened and concerns began to arise. Following closely behind the SS Edmund Fitzgerald was actually a different lake freighter, the Arthur M. Anderson. This was led by Captain Bernie Cooper. Now, just so you have an image for his name, we do have a picture of him, thanks to Wood TV, but this is Captain Cooper.
Okay, yeah, looking like a captain. He's got a suit on, his tie and everything.
He's holding a pipe. I mean, that's a sophisticated man right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's got all the stripes and everything.
Yeah.
Little captain hat.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah, very proud man.
I do believe he's standing actually at the bow, the front of the Anderson there.
Yeah, you can see just all the rows of where everything would go.
Mm-hmm. So this is a smaller freighter, but ultimately, Captain Cooper's vessel had departed from Two Harbors, Minnesota, which is about 30 miles away from Superior, so their route is going to be pretty similar, hence why they ended up being not too far behind. You know, ultimately the ship did catch up, and the two captains were in contact, with the Fitzgerald taking the lead on this journey. It's unclear where the Arthur M. Anderson was headed, but they were following the same path as the Fitzgerald across Lake Superior, and the Anderson stayed specifically about 10 to 15 miles behind the Fitzgerald during this journey. I don't know if that is a kind of like a rule or some sort of code, or if that's just kind of a agreed upon safe distance for turbulent waters or what have you, but that's about as far back as they were. The two captains were aware of a storm that was brewing, so they decided to take an alternate route. They shifted to take what they called the northerly course through Lake Superior. They believed this route would be safer, as they would be protected by the highlands on the Canadian side, on the north side, so that would kind of buffer the wind from sweeping across the waters. So on this route, they planned to later make a southeast turn, which would lead them to a place called Whitefish Point. This is where they could seek shelter from the weather in the inclement conditions. Now, Whitefish Point is a small peninsula in the northern part of Michigan on the southeasternmost portion of Lake Superior. Kind of on their way out of Lake Superior, this is where they could harbor for just a little bit and not necessarily dock, but kind of get closer into land and maybe wait for the storm to blow over. That said, it seems that weather conditions were worsening throughout the night, and both captains had experience piloting ships in similar conditions, and so they did have a little bit of confidence about them. They had some experience as to what to expect. But to give you an idea of what the storm looked and felt like, the wind gusts were measured around 50 knots. The waves were as tall as 12 to 16 feet. And for reference, 50 knots is about 57 miles per hour or 92 kilometers per hour. On the Beaufort scale, the scale used to measure wind conditions, 50 knots, suffice to say, is considered extremely severe.
And you just don't think about the water like that when it comes to a lake.
Not at all.
You think, okay, if I was to give you that description, you'd be like, cool, you're in the ocean somewhere.
Right. You're at like Point Nemo, you're far from people. No, dude, you're right there in the lake. And during research on this episode, it became abundantly clear to those who knew about this case, were discussing this case, or lived in and around the Great Lakes, that they can be very scary. Lake Superior is not a stranger to conditions like this. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that in the theories, but a lot of people that have the experience know that Lake Superior can be absolutely terrifying when it comes to weather. So the next day, the journey is continuing, of course, and the Anderson is still following relatively closely behind. Captain Cooper is watching the Fitzgerald pass over dangerous areas of known shallow water, and he's watching this on radar. And he's kind of concerned. He's thinking, well, he knows better than to go into these shallows. In fact, at some points, looking at the radar, it seems that the ship was drifting into areas that were only about 11 feet deep, about like less than 3.5 meters. So, some backyard pools are deeper than that. And the average depth of Lake Superior, we couldn't find the depth of the route they were going to take. But to give an idea, Lake Superior has an average depth between 433 and 483 feet, or 132 and 147 meters. So usually a lot deeper than 11 feet. Now, what made things kind of hard to read is that when looking at the radar, the sea spray combined with the snowy weather conditions kind of make it impossible for Anderson to have a clear view of the Fitzgerald, which is why he's relying on the radar. And he's also seeing other things popping up on the radar. Hold on to that thought. I'll discuss that in more detail when it comes to the theories.
Like your boat's so big, like if there's a huge heavy fog that rolled in, you can't. Luckily it's on your back end that you're not seeing, so you just gotta guide forward. But I don't know. I mean, it is a lake, so it's not the big open sea, right? There could, be things in your path. You also have to think about how like shallow the water can get too.
Yeah. Yep.
Like I've never driven a limo before, but I assume it'd be an experience that you'd have to adjust to when you're driving around,
Right. I mean, imagine you can only see so far ahead of you, and trying to follow another limo who then starts going off-roading, and you're like, well, that doesn't add up. No. It's not adding up. Yeah, I want you to hold on to what's happening here because this is a huge part that paints a picture for some of the theories as to why is the captain ending up in some of these shallows? What is Captain Cooper, the captain of the Anderson, what is he seeing on the radar? And are there false positives? Are there other things happening that kind of complicate this read? But ultimately, around this time, it was estimated that the Fitzgerald was still only about 17 miles ahead of the Anderson. And so it gives you an idea of how windy it was. The sea breeze is kicking up, the snow is coming down. Very difficult to see. Now, for some more specifics on this situation, I actually want to quote a passage from one article by the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum. Here it is, quote, Captain Cooper maintained that he watched the Edmund Fitzgerald pass far too close to 6 Fathom Shoal to the north of Caribou Island. He could clearly see the ship and the beacon on Caribou on his radar set and could measure the distance between them. He and his officers watched the Fitzgerald pass right over the dangerous area of shallow water. By this time, snow and rising spray had obscured the Fitzgerald from sight, visible 17 miles ahead on radar. End quote. So even then, I guess it's because we know what's about to happen. This feels extra terrifying, but regardless, as a non-seasoned captain of a vessel, listen, I'm playing with Hot Wheels in my bathtub still.
Right.
Having these conditions settle upon your ship, I feel like is deeply haunting and kind of unnerving.
I completely agree. I almost wonder, is it just best to just just stall, drop the anchor, and then just hang out. You know what I mean? Like, why keep pushing forward in these dangerous conditions when the outcome could be so devastating, as opposed to just, hey, let's just wait until the weather clears up.
I would say, on one hand, you make a great point. It's a great question. On one hand, these are veteran captains. They've been through things like this before, and so they know the confidence of their instruments. They know to push forward, make it to a designated safe spot where then they could do exactly that. Maybe anchor to wait some stuff out. I would say also anchoring probably in the middle, like kind of where they are in the middle of Lake Superior, wouldn't be super wise because of waves and wind conditions. You leave yourself a little exposed. That's my guesstimation there.
Yeah, I mean, the waves are just beating down on the ship.
Exactly.
And then you said like 16-foot waves?
12 to 16 foot waves coming at this shit. Yeah.
On a lake!
On a lake, dude.
On a lake. I mean, that just shows you how big that lake is.
It does. I feel like, because we call it here in Austin, Lady Bird Lake. My guys, it's a river. It's the river, Colorado River.
Lady Bird Lake, it's a river.
It's a river that gets wide at some points over in the west, but like there are spots where it's definitely like 12 to 16 feet deep, and so it's definitely wild to think about waves on a lake just passively. Again, the Great Lakes are wildly huge. It's really hard to fathom unless you've been there. Okay, so at this point, Captain Cooper sees them go over the shallows. It's a bit concerning. Again, this plays into some of the theories, but now, around 3:30 p.m. that afternoon, Captain McSorley made contact back with the Anderson. He radios Captain Cooper stating, quote, "Anderson, this is the Fitzgerald. I have a fence rail down, 2 vents lost or damaged, and a list. I'm checking down. Will you stay by me till I get to Whitefish?" End quote. So he's saying he's taken some damage and his ship is listing, leaning to a side. This might indicate that maybe the ship is taken on water, that the cargo has moved in a way to kind of upset the balance when it's stored and locked down. So a few raising orange flags here. He's basically saying, I'm going to slow down, but stay with us until we get to safer waters. Now at this point, Captain McSorley does indeed slow down the Fitzgerald to then allow the Anderson to catch up, close that 17-mile gap a bit, and the pair continue sailing together. No alarms are reported or made by Captain McSorley, as he only radioed to clarify navigation. So right now it feels like everything is okay. Then the storms continue to worsen. Captain Cooper reported winds measuring between 58 and 70 knots, now recording waves between 18 and 25 feet tall.
How tall is the shortest side of the boat?
That's a good question.
Is at this point, are the waves crashing onto the boat as opposed to the side of the boat?
It's very likely on the shorter parts, that long middle stretch you talked about, it's very likely that the waves can now crest into that territory, because I believe the maximum height of the ship, probably from bottom to top, I don't know if it's sea level to top,
right?
But the data I have is about 38 feet for the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. So yes, we're definitely approaching a territory where the waves are high enough to crest over the railings.
Yeah, I mean, and then you got all that big cargo, which is probably going to get, with the wind, right? The wind is pushing the waves, and so the waves are hitting the cargo with the pressure of the water and the wind, and then so at that point, you might get like side heavy.
Yeah, totally. You're kind of seeing like, it might not be super tall as far as the freight and the cargo is concerned, but you have enough wind and waves pushing against it. It could be creating like a sideways churning, right?
Yeah.
Pushing the ship top over a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So like I said, the wind has greatly increased, the waves have greatly increased, and this next report comes from Captain Cooper on the Anderson at 6:55 p.m. He describes what he felt like as a bump, which doesn't sound too wild, but for a veteran captain, it's kind of alarming. He says the ship lurched, and they saw a massive wave engulf the entire ship from back to front. The wave hit the back of the ship with such force that it drove the front of the boat down into the lake. And so exactly like your inclination was, if it was coming from the side, it would cause a list. Coming from the back, it pushes then the front down, which is where the captain sits, as you pointed out, down into the water a little bit. And so, yeah, you can see now how the lake is really having its way pushing this ship around.
Yeah, that's not good. That's a lot of cargo. We were out there in the middle. But also, like, we do know that this ship doesn't make it. And so for me in my head, I'm like, how much of the ship have we retrieved, if any, etc.? Because it's in a lake. You think it'd be easier to grab and like get at than like the ocean.
Sure. Yeah.
But we'll see what happens.
Now, to be super clear, a lot of these descriptions come from Cooper on the Anderson, but the vivid details from here paint what is likely also happening to the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. And so I actually want to quote Cooper here, and he says this, quote, "Then the Anderson just raised up and shook herself off of all that water. Baroof, just like a big dog. Another wave just like the first one, or bigger, hit us again. I watched those two waves head down the lake towards the Fitzgerald, and I think those were the two that sent her under." End quote.
So we're assuming that he saw it go under then?
He's surmising, right?
That he saw the waves that would have taken her out.
Right.
Got it,
He
okay.
knows how his ship responded to those. He's guessing that of all the things he saw and felt that night, that maybe those were the two waves big enough to create an oomph strong enough to take that behemoth down. Two different ships, two different conditions. Again, we'll talk about the cargo, some of the theories, structurally what might be going on with the Fitzgerald. But ultimately, you know, it paints a very vivid image of what happened that night. And I'll kind of continue with the timeline because things go on for at least another 15, 20 minutes before we really start to know that the Fitzgerald is probably gone. But it's never seen going down, I think. So while all this is happening, first mate on the Anderson named Morgan Clark, he's keeping a watch on the Fitzgerald via radar during this entire journey. So regardless, to your point, if they see it or lose sight of it again, someone's keeping an eye on the Fitzgerald on radar. But he seems to keep losing her, again, looking at the radar due to what's called sea return, or sometimes sea clutter. This happens when waves get so tall that they can interfere with the reflection of the radar, and it creates essentially unwanted random signals on the display, random pings that you would trust but would be a ship. But because the waves coming up so high, they catch and reflect things. And so now he's struggling to really honestly track the ship itself. Then around 7:10 p.m., Clark radioed the Fitzgerald to help them navigate to Whitefish Point. Clark asked, quote, "By the way, Fitzgerald, how are you making out with your problems?" End quote. So again, this is minutes after that double wave had just hit the Anderson and now headed off towards Fitzgerald. And Captain McSorley on the Fitzgerald responds with simply, quote, "We are holding our own," end quote. Now this would be the last time anyone had heard from the Fitzgerald or had seen the Fitzgerald.
Thought so. I was like, the way everything is going, everything is crescendoing at this point. I was like, I would not be surprised if that was like the last message ever.
Yeah. It sounds like a stressed out captain. I'm obviously adding a lot of assumptions into the mix here, but you know, we're holding our own sounds like, you know, we got some problems, but we're dealing with it. We've got it. We've got this under control. But then just 5 minutes later at 7:15 p.m., the vessel once again disappeared from radar. But unlike the anomalies beforehand, she never came back. The positive radar readings from the Fitzgerald never returned. So essentially, we're pretty confident around this time is when she went under. Clark then tries to contact the ship once again at 7:22 p.m., but of course, as you can imagine, no response. Captain Cooper then contacted other ships nearby to see if they had seen or heard from the Fitzgerald, and at this point in time, the weather cleared up just enough for the lights on the Fitzgerald to be visible, right? But they weren't. So now all the precipitation and the wind, they're like, I should be seeing it. She's not there. So we're pretty 100% confident, I would say, in retrospect, from Captain Cooper's perspective, that the Fitzgerald is unfortunately succumbed to the conditions and sunk.
Damn. The unfortunate thing too is just the captain was confident, you know, where it's like, hey, we got this, we're looking good. I know it's bad, but you know, we're feeling good about it. And then probably just taken by the sea.
It's just one of those really unfortunate last messages where, yeah, maybe in retrospect, knowing what happens, it feels ominous, but also it lacks the information that you would hope would have been there. You know, because like looking back, I'm like, man, I wish the captain would have known to say something more like, we need help, or taking on water, or something else.
Right.
But again, I don't know the situation. I don't know what Captain McSorley's going through, but suffice to say, an ominous, if not ambiguous, final message.
I would say so for sure. And it's just unfortunate, just the condition. Yeah. So that does intrigue me with some of the theories at the end to see what happened, because it does appear like it is what it appears to be, which is the fact that, like, okay, the water was just so wild that here we are.
And you're not wrong to feel that way. That is a prominent cornerstone of essentially a lot of the theories. The discussion becomes more of the nuanced perspective on that. You know, was it mechanical issues? Was it human failure? Was it hubris? Was it other things? Like, there's a lot of other moving parts that the weather essentially might have exacerbated. But to paint a very vivid and ominous picture of that evening, in his report about the incident, this is what Captain Cooper wrote. Quote, "At this time, I became very concerned about the Fitzgerald. Couldn't see his lights when we should have. I then called the William Clay Ford to ask him if my phone was putting out a good signal, and also perhaps if the Fitzgerald had rounded the point and was in shelter. After a negative report, I called the Sioux Coast Guard because I was sure something had happened to the Fitzgerald. The Coast Guard were at this time trying to locate a 16-foot boat that was overdue." End quote. So essentially, he calls in the Coast Guard right away, which is a great move. He's checking his signal to make sure he could be read by the Fitzgerald and not that it was a failure of the phone. He also noted that the Coast Guard themselves was also scrambled because a 16-foot boat was due at a dock somewhere and never showed up. And so whatever was going on in the storm that night, there were likely
multiple casualties.
Yeah. Other shipwrecks.
So yeah, so at that point, it's just a bunch of everyone's scrambling, like you said. Oh man.
Making the right moves, though, all things considered.
In that situation, you gotta assume the worst, you know?
Yeah.
And not put it off. Make the call. And unfortunately, you're like probably in a queue in terms of responses and action being taken.
Especially when you consider the weather, you know, they can't scramble a chopper to come look from the skies because the wind is just so brutal. Those things would go down pretty quick.
Yep.
Now, it's unclear ultimately when he might have called the Coast Guard, but he did call them again, we know, at 8 p.m. So there wasn't like a 38-minute delay between his reaction and calling the Coast Guard, but it seems like his report was somewhat timely. Suffice to say, he called within the hour, right? At least twice. And he was adamant that something happened to the Fitzgerald and thus began the search for the missing ship. The Anderson had made it to Whitefish Point and was able to relieve its crew members, but when speaking with the Coast Guard, it became clear that the Anderson was the closest ship to the scene and would, in theory, be the fastest to go back to the scene in order to seek any answers. Lifeboats, life rafts, people, debris, anything. Yeah.
I mean, that's what I thought it would be too, because they're right there. That's just always scary to me because it's like you don't want to run people over. I'm sure they have like their spotlights and things like that, but the conditions are just so rough. What do you do? How do you handle it? I'm sure they, you know, the veteran captains and crew, and there's procedures and ways about going about things, and they have it all dialed in. It just seems like a daunting task.
It's a very daunting task and a dangerous one at that. You know, the Coast Guard's aware, but they do ask, like, hey, would you be willing to take the Anderson back out in search of the Fitzgerald? This would mean going back into the storm, as you're pointing out. And while they were hesitant, given everything you just outlined, ultimately they did agree, and they became the primary ship leading the search. Now, in doing the search, this is where I'll kind of start to point out some phobias. Our own Christian, man in the chair, producer galore, has thalassophobia, and bless his heart, he did see some of these images unexpectedly. So I'm going to start forecasting a little bit here, but as they go out to find anything, right, whatever they can find, they do stumble across 2 lifeboats, some debris, life jackets, but there was no sign of any survivors. There's an image I want to show you, Fredo, of one of the lifeboats. quite banged up. Again, nobody was in it. It was recovered and taken back to land, and this is where eventually a photo was taken. And this is from the Detroit Free Press.
Whoa, that's a lifeboat?
It's a lifeboat.
It was pretty massive for a lifeboat.
Perspective is definitely throwing it a bit.
Okay, that's okay. Cool. Because I'm also just like, I don't see a person next to it, so I can't quite tell. It is torn to shreds.
It is bing bong banged up.
Like
The front is torn open.
the front, yeah, it's like ripped open. On the front left side, there's huge, massive dents. And then it's just like peeled open, like just a poor can opener job, just like ripped down. The water did this?
So that is, now that you point this out, because this is, I'll be honest, the first time I'm seeing this, I'd seen a different image before. What this makes me think is that it was never deployed. What this makes me think is that the lifeboats, like whatever happened to the ship was so sudden that when the ship went down, the ship itself might have landed on this lifeboat.
Yeah.
Parts of the ship itself, whether it be smokestacks or fences or just pieces of cargo, might have bashed it further, scraped it, dragged it, pulled it apart, and then for some reason it stayed afloat to be found.
That makes sense. That could be a possibility for sure. Damn, that's ripped up.
It is haunting actually to look at that, to see the huge dents, like treated like a paper boat. So to recap real quick, they found 2 lifeboats, debris, life jackets, and unfortunately, no sign of survivors. Now, much later into the night, it's around 10 p.m., the Coast Guard is able to launch the HU-16 aircraft to search the scene. These are water landing and takeoff aircraft, 2-prop. And so I imagine the storm had died down a little bit enough to make this safe. And they also dispatched 2 cutters. You have the Naugatuck and the Woodrush, and they arrived on scene November 11th and November 14th, respectively. The search lasted for several months, with several sonar scans being conducted to locate the debris. This kind of harkens back to your inclination, Fredo. This isn't necessarily like finding a ship in the ocean, but it's still finding a ship. They have a decent idea of where this might have happened, right? Given the route, given the timeline, but it's still quite the hellish endeavor to figure out where under the lake it would be. Now, over the course of 3 days since its arrival on November 14th, the Woodrush cutter used a side scan sonar and found 2 large pieces of debris in the same area. They conducted another sonar scan from November 22nd through the 25th, and a third was conducted further, much later, in May of 1976. This time, however, the Woodrush was operating a Curve 3, the CURV-3, which was an underwater recovery vehicle. This device captured video footage and over 900 photographs of the spot that they were radaring and seeing positive results. And so they did find, in fact, the wreckage, and this is where we have countless, 900 specifically, photographs of the Edmund Fitzgerald on the bottom of the lake. It was then, on May 20th, 1976, that the words Edmund Fitzgerald could be seen clearly on the stern of the ship, upside down, at the bottom of Lake Superior. Now again, thalassophobia beware, I do have the next 3 images for you, Fredo, are of that ship.
Ooh.
Different spots of the ship, but all containing the name of the vessel.
First one's black and white.
Mm-hmm.
It says Edmund Fitzgerald. You can see that. The next one's like an upside down shot, so I guess maybe part of the ship's upside down.
Yeah, the stern of the ship was actually completely upside down.
Yeah.
The ship actually broke into 2 halves.
Yeah.
Much like the Titanic when it went under.
There you go.
And so...
And some of this is right side up.
Some of this is right side up, yeah, because they're different spots of the ship, etc. But
wow.
It feels just as eerie as the Titanic.
It's always eerie to see photos like underwater of like boats, stuff like that. It's just like, it's not supposed to be there.
No, it's kind of like the same feeling you get when you see a decrepit hospital or a decaying school or an old prison. Places that are like almost liminal, but falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
Just seeing the bottom of a lake or an ocean with something that used to have life on it, a door, furniture, cargo, windows. It's just this clashing of worlds that don't blend together and create such a, just a deeply unsettling feeling.
I mean, they found it though, and that's what I was thinking, because it's like, okay, we had a ship that's was in close proximity and in contact up until its final moments. They're moving as fast as they possibly could. And so I was very confident that we'd see some of this.
Yeah, and these images come thanks to AP and the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum. But I want to jump ahead to the next image for you, Fredo, just because of what you said. This shows generally the route that was taken with a few timestamps as to when certain moments happened. So as I was shouting out moments and times throughout the kind of narrative portion of this, you can see where they were. You can see where Caribou Island was, so it gives you an idea of where the shallows were, and you can kind of roughly see where they would have crashed. So this is why the search was so focused in this area, and you can also see Whitefish Bay. So it helps paint a vivid image there. And this comes from the Spokesman review.
Yeah, Lake Superior is massive, man. Jeez. It is like a damn ocean.
Yeah, and you can see why they went so far north, because had they gone south, they really would have been in the middle of Lake Superior.
Yeah.
So north, they have some topography to help block the wind.
They do, exactly. Big chunk of water.
Yeah. Now, almost a year later, after the discovery of these images and the taking of these photos, it was April 15th, 1977. The U.S. Coast Guard releases an official report on the wreckage entitled Subject, SS Edmund Fitzgerald, official number 277437, sinking in Lake Superior on 10 November 1975 with loss of life. End subject. All 29 crew members perished in this shipwreck. And for those in living memory of this moment, it hit the news media and was broadcasted around the country in a way that it was a really terrifying time. Storms like this are not to be unexpected, and we'll talk about that, but I'll jump to the point. Like, at least one shipwreck happens, I think, a week going back decades.
Really?
But the drama of this one being the largest, the incredible loss of life here, it's kind of what piqued everybody's interest into what was going on. And there are some knock-on effects, obviously, when you have a moment like this that hits the spotlight so much. Regulations and other things can update and change. But suffice to say, for anybody who was living in the mid-70s, by many accounts online, it was a truly terrifying as it was upsetting story.
Yeah, I mean, especially because so many people came out to see it. It feel like such an accomplishment.
Yeah. God, I forgot about that part. To see this ship off. Again, the parallels to the Titanic are uncanny. And Task Force, if you want to hear the conspiracies and all of the rigmarole that surrounds the wreckage of the Titanic, we have a whole episode from years ago on that. But yeah, to see a ship like this off, only for it to end like this, that's horrific.
Yeah, because you're seeing the ship, right? It's tangible. You're seeing the faces, I'm sure.
Right, dude. It's not just a story.
So unfortunate. Yeah, it's very vivid, right? And it's unfortunate, too, that no one made it out.
Yeah.
I mean, the waves are pretty wild. Ah, man, it's just so unfortunate. You think that, jump off the boat, and then if you could swim for a little bit, then sure, you'll be fine, or at least some person can tread water, but that water is turning you upside down, inside out, banging you into things probably.
Right.
Yeah. You just like to think that you could just jump out as the ship is going down, and
you're totally right. Not only are the waves burning and churning, they are tall, you're getting thrown, you're getting dropped. The water is extremely frigid. The hypothermia risk is still enormous. You are very far north. If you've swam in any of the Great Lakes, you'll know they are icy. They're not for the faint of heart, let alone in November, okay? That far north. Now, to paint a more vivid picture, if you want it, viewer discretion is advised. I did stumble on the fact that radio traffic from that night has been recorded, preserved, archived, and even uploaded to places like YouTube. You can go listen to the radio chatter as it happened that night. This isn't a dramatic reenactment. It's actually the radio broadcasting. And I listened to snippets of it, and they talk about the waves. They talk about how it's thrashing against their ship. Not necessarily this specific ship, right? I didn't listen closely enough to know if it was them or a nearby ship or what have you. But again, there's a lot of ships in the area experiencing that storm. And you can hear some of the chatter regarding SS Edmund Fitzgerald within it, but it's, to say the adjective again, it's truly haunting.
Yeah, I don't know if I could do that. Just listen to it outright like that.
Yeah, it's tough. Now, as we dive into the theories, of course, as you astutely pointed out, a lot of the theories pivot around the idea of the storm. It's nearly impossible to get away. It seems like the storm is the key feature that ultimately ended up creating the shipwreck. And that seems very obvious at first glance, but ultimately the debate, the unanswered portion, is in how the flooding of the ship occurred, how the storm bested this ship and not another ship like the Anderson. What were the specifics ultimately that led to the sinking condition? And that's kind of the conversation that we're going to have as we flow from one theory to another. But to this day, the official cause of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald is technically unsolved. Again, it's just one of those cases that has the rubber stamp of being unsolved, but it's the nuance. How, like, all the different theories that attempt to answer it all feel very strong. And that's kind of why it's unsolved. So one theory suggests that the ship sank because it was carrying a load that was too heavy to bear for as long as it was holding it. In November of 1975, the month that it sank, it was recorded that the ship was a full 3 feet, 3¼ inches further down into the water than it was originally designed to be sat at. So this shows that the weight carried in this ship, we talked about buoyancy and joked about it and stuff, but it might have been holding weight beyond its true engineered capacity, so it was sitting lower.
Ooh.
And maybe for a normal haul across the waters here, it would have been fine. But the fact that the storm then came through, it might have exacerbated this small detail, right?
Yeah, because there were ships that made it. But then again, it's like, why are you overloading it in the first place? Like,
that's that greed, baby. Time is money, gotta make it.
yeah, it's like, new ship, it could push through. That's just it's just the safety number. It's just fine.
Right, it's just safety. This thing can take it all. But yeah, I mean, it really could be the hubris. You asked about why didn't they just anchor early on? Another part is it's part of the job. You got a job to. I hate that's a thing, that money is a motivating and driving factor, but reality is reality, and it is part of the equation. And so if a company is unscrupulous enough to want to overload it just enough that it could, well, we'll roll the dice.
Yeah.
And then they get unlucky with a terrible, terrible storm. So taking this into account, the sitting lower in the water, and 3 feet, 3 inches is not a little bit. That's a decent amount. This theory states that the water had most likely then been filling into the cargo hold and into the ballast tanks at the front of the ship. This could have been happening earlier, and maybe that's why it's sinking lower. That part's a little unclear to me. So it's either two things. I want to be very transparent. It could be that the ship is overloaded, or some people have surmised that maybe it had taken on water, which is why it was sat a little low. But either way, it's either taking on water or it's poised to take on some more water. And so being lower into the water, it's getting hit by these giant waves that we know are happening. And so it's hitting the back, which pushes the front down, and that causes water to kind of cascade into the deck. But all this hemming and hawing, the jostling of the ship, can cause what's known as hogging and sagging. And to an extreme case, these kind of things can crack a hull. So hogging, yeah. And obviously we know the ship is in half at the bottom of the lake. And so this theory does have an interesting point here. So hogging, I believe, is where, the crest of the wave is happening under the middle of the ship. This isn't to say that the ship is out of water or anything, but that the front and the back are less held by the water, which would mean that the middle would bow upwards. Sagging is kind of the opposite. When the wave is first hitting the back, and maybe another wave is leaving off the front and the back are being lifted up by the wave, but there might be a trough from the wave in the middle, which means that the middle of the ship would sag.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
Just weird weight distributions.
Exactly.
Yeah, because the water is flowing, and while it's flowing, it's got weight to it. I mean, just say, like, simply put, too, you could just have, like, water go onto the ship, heavy amount, right? It's weighing down the back and then pulling the front forward, and then maybe the wave from underneath sends it. It starts rolling forward, and then all of a sudden the weight is shifting, and then then it's just different parts bending back down while it's like being weighed down or being pushed up. And boats ain't supposed to be bending and flexing like that.
Exactly. So to your very vivid picture, it's like if the waves are coming at a certain cadence, you almost hit, this is definitely the wrong mechanism here, but you almost hit a resonant frequency where the middle of the ship is bending up and bending down and bending up and bending down just enough to create fatigue, right? If you look at something like a paper clip and you bend it, okay, it bent.
True. Yeah, the paper clip is like the best example. You just bend it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
And it'll snap.
Yeah.
That's structural failure through fatigue. It's one of the first things you learn in structural engineering, and most of that has left my mind, so don't quiz me. But that's essentially what this theory is saying, that it was lower in the water, and that issue was exacerbated by the hogging and sagging created by the waves.
Yeah, it just gets worse and worse.
Just gets worse and worse. And the fact that the ship was broken into two parts at the bottom of the lake makes a lot of people go, that makes sense. And when you put that into mind with the two waves that swept over the Anderson and went after the Fitzgerald, it stands to reason that maybe that was the straw that literally broke the ship's back.
I mean, it was split. It did sink. So at some point it buckled under the pressure, I gotta say.
Yeah. Now, in addition to that, I kind of say that it's technically unsolved, which it is. I want to point to the Coast Guard's report. They have more authority on the matter, and they state that while the official cause of the sinking cannot be determined, they say it's likely that it was due to the massive amount of flooding in the cargo hold, which caused it to lose buoyancy. So now they're going to focus more on the cargo hold getting filled with water and less on the bending and flexing and snapping. So in their theory, the Coast Guard states that the cause of the flooding was due to the, quote, ineffective hatch closures as boarding seas rolled along the spar deck, end quote. Suffice to say, water pouring over the deck, and when they say batten down the hatches, that literally means securing the hatches that are on top of the deck, and sealing them up, making sure they're watertight. These hatches are large, watertight openings that are used to access below deck, whether it's to stow and access cargo or to access machinery, the mechanics of the ship engine, what have you. It is a way to kind of access below deck. And if those aren't properly battened down, so to speak, then water can, through all these waves dumping over the rails, could make their way down in there, and through a heavy storm, bring enough water on board to just have it, off it goes.
Sink right down. And then when it's sinking down, it might just be the pressure pulled from the middle and then snaps it. That's the thing too. Yeah, it's got to take on water, and sure, you have certain pockets, or for lack of better terms, cutouts on the ship that disperse the water, but it's not like waterproof. It's still going to leak into the ship. And so if you're just constantly taking on heavy amounts of water, it's just going to flow in and then start adding weight. And then you're more susceptible to more water, and then just compiles onto itself.
Right. Like if the water starts flowing into the front or the back, it's going to weigh it down more, which means more water, very much like the Titanic. And then it could list up into the air, which many people have theorized is what happened. Again, very like the Titanic, to the point where the end in the air would then snap under its weight, hence the two pieces at the bottom. Now, what's interesting about this theory is that there have been many experts out there that have dismissed it. They have said that if the hatch closures were ineffective, therefore water could leak in, they would have said if this were the case, the ship would have probably gone down at the first sight of heavy weather and would not have struggled as long as they did through the storms, the rough waves, etc., only to sink way further into the storm. That if they were taking on water, essentially they would have sank faster. And so it's a theory that makes a lot of sense. Might be hard to prove now that it's at the bottom of the water and it might have damaged in its crash into the floor, but ultimately it makes a lot of sense, but I can see why people might disagree with it. Now, this is where the terrifying tale of the three sisters comes in. Another theory about what happened to this ship is that a rogue wave took it out. Simply enough. Rogue waves are massive, unpredictable waves that sometimes form and are often twice the size of the surrounding waves. So we know for a fact that the captain of the Anderson following behind saw massive waves, estimated their height, experienced them himself on his ship, and honestly, I think this theory could dovetail in with the previous two theories. But what's interesting is that in salt water, rogue waves are more spread out. They're a little less blunt. So if you were to experience one, especially in the vast depth of the ocean, you might not know it. You might realize you rise up about 30 feet and drop back down gently, because waves don't really crest until the energy is pushed upwards by the shallow water, right? As the wave is approaching a shore, the depth of the water, the wave has nowhere for it to go other than up, hence why a tsunami goes up, but you might not notice it out at sea. But what's interesting here is that in fresh water, like the Great Lakes, like Lake Superior, they're sharper, faster. They can hit and strike pretty bluntly. And they might only be 4 to 8 seconds apart.
Oof.
In fact, this is exactly where the Three Sisters comes in. This is a legendary phenomenon, but it's recognized and measured by science. This is something that happens specifically in Lake Superior, in which the situations can be perfect. That 3 consecutive massive rogue waves might hit a ship in quick succession, preventing the ship from recovering. Maybe it can survive 1, maybe it can survive 2. But when the third has come, it's jostled the ship once, twice, and before it can recover, the third one hits, finishing the deed, toppling it over, or shoving it underwater enough that it took on too much water for it to possibly recover, right?
Yeah, when you're getting hit that quickly, the boat's not going to have enough time to recover. So if you're just consistently battering the hell out of it, then yeah, it's just wild. It's just wild to think that, you know, especially for the other boat, that we could have been that boat. We were so close, that could have been us.
Yeah, truly. Now, it also stands to reason, because of what the Anderson captain kind of mentions, that the back of his ship is completely engulfed, the front of their ship is shoved down. That wave carries over their ship and off northeast over to the Fitzgerald. He knows it's going to hit them because they're taking the same route. Meanwhile, another one hits him, so he knows both are heading after them. He doesn't mention a third, so it's possible that these are just 2 enormous waves. But it's also possible that their ship is shorter. They might have been less heavy. There might have been, again, the conditions were just different for the Anderson, that they might have survived these 2. Whereas, given the period or the repetition of these waves, it might have just been perfect enough for the length, size, weight, depth in the water for the Fitzgerald to be hit in a lethal manner, you know? Almost like a freak accident. Just all these things piled up to create a moment that hopefully shouldn't happen, maybe shouldn't have happened, but did. Yeah, I mean, it stands to reason, ultimately, that rogue waves would form in a storm like this. Even if this wasn't the result of a rogue wave, rogue waves aren't as rare as one might think at a glance. We're learning a lot more about these in recent years, but some experts indicate that given the conditions on Lake Superior that day, if, let's just say, a storm were to happen for 30 days, it's possible, by some experts' opinions, that rogue waves could happen daily, at least once a day, in conditions like this. And so if this storm was going on and on and on, it would start to become like almost expected that a wave of that caliber could come through.
That's just bad timing. It just seems, I mean, again, you know, perfect storm type situation.
Yep. That movie was terrifying.
That movie was pretty terrifying. It's crazy out there, and most of the world's made up of water. We try our best to conquer it, still at the whims of nature, as we can see here.
So kind of closing this theory here, it is estimated that if these were rogue waves, unlike kind of what the captain of the Anderson pointed out, where he's saying these are like 25-ish feet waves, if these were truly rogue waves that the ship nearby didn't experience, I feel like, one, that would be a little strange, but not impossible. It would stand to reason that these rogue waves could have been as tall as 60 feet.
Oh.
Yeah. And it's believed if that were the case, this would have probably been the final nail in the coffin to an already beaten up Edmund Fitzgerald. So again, regardless of the other theories, if it is sitting lower in the water, if it is taking on any water, a wave like this would just cap it off. But kind of in brief here, the final theory is at the bottom of the ship was scraped up after sailing over the shallow ends of the waters, and it took on structural damage that then allowed the ship to take on water, which is ultimately why it sunk.
Does that show in the hull and stuff like that?
You would think it would, actually. Christian, I'm curious. You don't need to look at images, because I know you're terrified of that, and that would be unfair to make you do. But we didn't see anything like that in our research. So, Christian, I'm just curious if you wouldn't mind being a third eye there. But you're right. With this having sank, I'm wondering if we could see on the upturned side of the ship what the damage looked like.
Yeah, you think you'd be able to see it?
Yeah. Now, obviously, you don't want to hit shallow waters. You would definitely take on some damage. Now, would it be sink the ship damage? That's the question. McSorley, as a captain, knew not to cross over this particular area of the lake because he knew of the shallow depths. So this starts to paint, to say it again, a vivid image of what's going on. People theorize within this kind of final theory that he likely would have been disoriented from being 24 hours awake without sleep. It was also likely under these conditions that he was suffering from something called motion fatigue due to the constant rocking on this boat caused by the storms. Yeah. And it would be like riding a roller coaster continuously for several hours. Eventually your muscles would just want to give out.
And then maybe that's what gave him the false confidence to radio in, saying that, we're doing well, we're doing okay.
Yeah, we're handling it, Yeah,
we're managing.
That, to me, I'm making an assumption, paints an image of something happening that they're taking care of, maybe bilging some water out. But the critical failure or the surprise wave, the rogue wave, really does also make sense in the sense of we're handling it. Well, then how, something quick must have happened.
Yeah, something again, the rogue waves.
Yeah.
You radio in, we're okay, we took some damage, but we're doing fine. And then those rogue waves hit, 4-second successions, 3 of them. And within 12 seconds, boom, it's all over.
Right. Hey, we're handling it.
A
few minutes later, you disappear from radar completely. That says, I'm bilging the water, we're totally fine, we'll make it. Something cataclysmic happened. You know what I mean? It does seem to reason that something quick would have gone down, rather than a slow sinking of the ship. Now, to cap off this theory, it is said that if the bottom of the ship had struck the ground, it could have caused damage to the steel hull, and it could have gone undetected amidst the rough storm and the waves and things. But again, the fact that it seemed to sink so fast after he radioed, he didn't seem alarmed, but again, I'm reading into it. I don't know. Christian, I'm curious if you managed to find anything on the damage.
It seems like there's conflicting reports. I see one thing that says a person by the name of Rick Mixter. He's an author and he wrote a book detailing the different investigations into the Edmund Fitzgerald. And according to him, he did do a dive of the wreck where there were no scratches or gouges found on the hull. And they actually even investigated the shoal itself that the hull was said to have scraped against and found no paint on it. But then I see another thing that says an investigator was hired by the ship operator's parent company that did supposedly find scrape marks and paint on the shoal. So hard to say.
Okay, but let me be cynical for a second. The ship operator's parent company would be inclined to make it his fault as a captain rather than our ships are faulty, right? Conflicting reports. Very interesting. God, but it makes these conversations so difficult when you start just, someone's lying.
Yeah, someone's lying here. And the thing is, it's right there in the bottom of the water.
It's right there, man. We got photos of it. Christian, don't look. But I want to know. Who's got more reason to lie? A little healthy skepticism never hurt nobody. But ultimately, it's that's the final theory here. There are a couple other smaller theories, but ultimately all center around similar ideas here. But prior to this incident, sinking ships in the Great Lakes were not all that uncommon. As I hinted at before, between the years 1875 and 1975, so the 100 years leading up to this shipwreck, there was reportedly an average of 1 shipwreck per week on the Great Lakes. Hopefully some are just like Tommy's little paper boat, Tommy's preschool project that just he made a boat out of a screen door and it didn't work, you know?
Right. Anyone with a boat license is going on there, and then all of a sudden it's being an issue. But if you got all these big tankers like having problems, like get out. Stop going into the water.
Pause and think about
a
it.
week?
Yeah.
Once a week on average? Come on.
I wonder what that is per capita, though, if that's even the right thing to say. Like, per the actual traffic on the Great Lakes, is that actually low enough that they just go, eh?
True. If like tens of thousands a week are totally fine.
Yeah, because they are heavily trafficked.
Yeah.
It's an interesting statistic to unnerve you, right? Some reports state that about 25,000 ships are at the bottom of the Great Lakes, with roughly half of those wrecks occurring in November due to bad weather. That said, the sinking of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald was truly an eye-opener for the nation and for the industry. Because of the size of the ship, it was regarded as the Titanic of the Great Lakes, and its sinking brought attention to long-standing equipment issues. After the wreck, the radar systems were updated, as well as navigational charts and communications between ships and those on land. Since then, there have been no major commercial shipwrecks on the Great Lakes. Hey, that's pretty nice.
Okay.
Today, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald remains closed to private diving tours and explorations, so this is more of a... you can't just go out there and go looking. This is something that has to be an official, kind of sanctioned investigation. Now, since no bodies were recovered, this is where things get a little morbid. It's possible that they remain amidst the wreckage, which is why in large part it is regarded as an underwater gravesite and thus left undisturbed. Now, it's likely that those bodies are incredibly well preserved due to the 500-foot depth, the lack of oxygen, and the freezing temperatures of the lake. Now, ultimately, in a more positive note, the shipwreck was immortalized by the ballad entitled The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald by Gordon Lightfoot. I do have this song. I'll play it for you after because we're getting along in the tooth here. I'll play you this song, Fredo, but I believe you would at least recognize it if you didn't know what it was about or what it was called. But the lyrics are truly all about what happened here in 1975. But with that, we have covered the tragic sinking of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. Any final thoughts? Any questions?
It makes it extra surreal and morbid knowing that there were so many people that were there to see it sent off. And then a ship that's so close by, or they could have essentially been a part of this themselves, and just being so close and not being able to do anything about it. Because we've covered ships before, they're out in the ocean, they get lost. There's nothing so brutal in a lake.
It's kind of a sneaky one. It makes you think rogue waves, impossible. Giant ships, no way.
Right, a massive ship like that on a lake, no problem. Didn't know, just had no idea that could be so brutal out there.
They really are baby oceans or baby seas.
They are, yeah.
They push the definition of what a lake is, I guess, but they're fresh water. But this is the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, a very, very fascinating case. Once again, thank you, Connor Hastings, for submitting this task force. If you have any mysteries, movies, scary games, or anything else that you want us to uncover here on Red Web, we have a form to submit that at redwebpod.com. And join the ranks of our newest member, C. Carr, or our buff scientist of the week. I'm going to try to get this right. Canadian. Oh, that's kind of appropriate. It's spelled strangely, but I think it's Canadian. It's like Canadian a little bit.
Oh, okay.
It was near Canada. And then, of course, our squonks, very familiar with the wet. We've got Broman, Clint from PS3, Tucker Did It, and Brett O'Meara. Thank you all so much for supporting the show directly and getting all those bonus goodies. Ad-free podcast, all the bonus stuff we talked about at the top. Join the ranks, redwebpod.com. All right, Fredo. With that said, I'll see you right back here next Monday for yet another mystery.